The Journal of Jesse Smoke, Part 6, page 59. May 17, 1838. Despite the general uncertainty, livestock still must be fed and farm chores done. Corn is now knee-high. Napoleon escaped his stall this morning and went into the cornfield. I was sure he had trampled the corn, or at least eaten some, but he had not. I believe he just did it to irritate me. He seemed to be laughing at me as I led him back into the barn. Mules! Too busy to write during the day, and now too tired this evening to write more than this. May 25th, 1838. Finally, a day of rest. Yet I find it hard to put pen to paper. The hardest part of writing is finding words. It is just like trying to catch a fish in the river with your hands. Just when you think you have it, there's a sudden flash of fins, and the quarry darts away. I have a new book to read. It was provided me by Reverend Eliezer Butler, who is both physician and missionary. He and his wife, who is expecting a child, invited me to visit them. Upon my departure, he placed this book in my hands. Though enjoyable, Reverend Butler assured me that it is not at all frivolous, for it is based upon a true story and shows how a man placed in a great trouble and danger may yet overcome terrible odds and survive. The book is Mr. Daniel Defoe's story of Castaway, Robinson Crusoe. His ship is destroyed by a sudden and unexpected storm, and he is cast naked upon a desert isle. During this tale may help me escape for a time from the deep cares and burdens of all. May 26, 1838. I have just awakened to the sound of thunder. It is not yet full dawn, so I write this by candlelight. Now I hear the crack of lightning. No, it is not. It is gunfire, and the thunder is the sound of the hooves pounding on the roads. Now someone is shouting words of command, a fist pounding upon our own door. June 4th, 1838. I now have so much to tell that I cannot dip my pen into the ink fast enough, or make my fingers catch up with my words. Even though I am still sick and weak from the loss of blood, I must write. It is a miracle that I still have this journal, and that I have ink and a pen to use to write. I am now one of many held prisoners by the armies of General Scott. We are crowded like hogs into a sty inside a high wall of timbers, no roof above us but the sky, and what few blankets can be spread to make what shades from the sun. Few blankets indeed. Most here have no blankets at all. Indeed, many have almost no clothes on their backs. Like my mother and my sisters and I, they were dragged from their homes before sunrise and shoved by bayonet point into the night and made to run before the soldiers down the dark roads. I must pause for a moment, for I feel I am about to faint. Fainting spell has passed. I am writing of that night. I pray I shall never again experience such a night. The darkness was lit not only by torches carried by the soldiers, but also by the brighter lights of the barns, the houses burning, whether by accident or design. Many of our Cherokee homes were set on fire as we left them. Perhaps it was done by the soldiers. However, I remember seeing the other men darting into our homes, white men, following the troops to take whatever they might steal as soon as we were gone. I do not think our own home was set on fire, but a roughly clad man with a gray beard tied to shove past the blue-eyed soldier escorting us off our porch. To his credit, that soldier grabbed the man by the scuff of his neck and hurled him off from the front porch onto his backside. The would-be looter glared at him and then scuttled off towards the barn like a gray rat. The soldier turned to my mother. "Your husband here?" he asked. My mother shook her head. Emily and Ruthie peered out from behind her, glaring at the soldier. "My mother does not speak English well," I said. The soldier turned to me. "But you do," he said. Then he looked back over his shoulder at the sound of the ruckus from the barn. Hoofs banged against the wood, and the man shouted in fright. Lit by the torchlight, the large shape came from bucking and kicking towards us. It was Napoleon, dragging the terrified gray-bearded thief, whose hand was caught on the halter. One final kick caught the man in his side, propelling him over the fence. Then the mule was gone, galloping off into the night. The officer sighed, reached into the pouch at his side, and pulled out a pencil and paper. My head spun like a top. He was now taking me to write down a list of our personal property: furniture, implements, beef, cattle, fodder, machinery, horses, mules. Was this a dream? One the feeler could drive from my head by the burning of tobacco and prayers to the fire. Somehow I managed to give some accounting of all we owned. He wrote it down and handed me a copy, telling me to keep it as record since the government collectors would come to gather up our property and care for it. Then he turned to my mother and looked down at her and my sisters in their night dresses. "Clothing, ma'am," he said. He pointed to their feet. "Shoes, too, but be quick about it." My mother needed no translation. She darted back into our cabin and returned with an armful of clothing, shoes for the girls, and several blankets over her shoulders. The next thing I knew, we were on the road in a crowd of people, shoulders jostling against each other. We stumbled down the road. The blue-eyed officer had vanished. The soldiers behind us cursed and shouted to hurry along. Some swung clubs at our backs. "Move! Damn you, move!" If anyone fell, they were yanked to their feet and shoved forward. My mother and sisters had vanished into the crowd. I tried to find them, but I could not. Some of the Cherokee faces around me were familiar, but I could not be certain who they were. I was not just the darkness and confusion. Most of those faces were distorted with fear and grief. All around us was the sound of weeping and moaning, and the thud of hooves and angry oaths bellowed at us. The taste of red dust, the fear, the smelling of burning and sweat and blood made a memory. That, I fear, I shall never forget. Perhaps I will never sleep again without the fear that I shall wake to such a terror. "Etsy!" I cried out. "Mother!" But no one answered to me. Too many were crying out the names of the mothers and fathers, children or other loved ones separated from them. A soldier has told us that we must now stop whatever we are doing and sleep. I am too weak to protest. I can write no more tonight. June 5th, 1838. This is our 10th day in the stockade camp. We shall return to the place where I left off when we stumbled down the dark road. I am ashamed to say that when I realized I did not have my journal with me, I felt almost as great a fear for it as for my mother and sisters. I had left it behind in our house. It would surely be thrown away or burned. I turned back to get it. I tried to force my way back through the crowd. I almost reached the soldiers on horseback. I hoped to find that blue-eyed officer. In my confused state, I believed he would listen to me and allow me to go back for my journal. Suddenly, something came hurtling down at me. It was the butt of a rifle swung by a soldier in uniform of the United States Regular. It struck me full in the face. I heard the crunch of my teeth splintering from that terrible blow that hit me like a lightning bolt. My mouth filled with blood, and I staggered back. Somehow I did not fall, but I continued on. My hands were pressed to my face, blood dripping between my fingers. Someone I did not know produced a handkerchief and helped me force it into my mouth to stem the flow of blood. The gentle hands of the other Cherokee people, as full of loss and grief as I was, reached out with kindness that somehow survived in the midst of chaos. They supported me, kept me from falling, helped me continue our sad journey. On we went, on toward the darkest dawn I had ever known. Once again, I am compelled to stop, for things are a-spin about me. June 7, 1838. Although my last entry was dated June 4th, I must confess I am not certain what the actual date was. Within this prison, we have no more access to newspapers or calendars than cattle do. Penned up like cattle, however, are better treated than the Cherokees. Hundreds of us are crowded together. I will take an exact count after I finish this entry. Reverend Butler, who has chosen to be here among us, tells me that today's date is June 7th. In 3 days it will be the Sabbath. There will be a religious service for those who choose to take part in it. It was Reverend Eliza Butler's face that I saw when I first woke in this place a week ago. I had no memory of arriving here. The pain and the loss of blood had taken away my senses. I had lain senseless for nearly 3 days. At least one soldier thought me be dead, asking those about me to carry my body from the stockade to bury outside the walls before I start to rot. His request was refused. From what I hear, I was guarded no less fiercely than a hurt cub by its mother bear. Jesse, Reverend Butler said on the day when I returned to awareness. He smiled down on me, a smile both warm and edged with sorrow. You have come back to us. I reached up to touch the bandages about my face and winced at the deep ache in the side of my jaw. In a soft, whispered voice, as if aware that too loud a tone would hurt my ears, Reverend Butler explained that I had lost 2 teeth there, shattered by the blow, but the roots had come out cleanly, and my jaw seemed to not be broken. Gentle fingers then grasped my hands and drew them away from my face. I recognized that touch. My mother's face appeared above me. My 2 sisters, Emily and Ruthie, were next to her. It was the sweetest sight I had ever seen. I had feared I would never see them again in this life. Gogiski, my mother whispered, holding my hands up to her wet cheeks. Etsy, I whispered back, my voice hoarse and weak. My mother pulled one of her hands away from mine and held it out towards my sister Emily. Something was in place in her hand. She held it so I could see, but I could not recognize it at first. Then I realized it was my journal. When my dear mother had gone back into our house, she had wrapped it up in one of the blankets. I touched the cover of my journal in trembling fingers as my other small sister Ruthie showed me what she held, my quills and my ink bottle. Watto, my dear family, I croaked. Then I fell into sleep. June 12th, 1838. I feel much stronger today. Reverend Butler held services yesterday. He was assisted by Reverends Jesse Bushyhead and Stephen Foreman, 2 Cherokee men who were preachers themselves. Now, more than 1 in 10 of those in Camp Cherokee are Christian, yet many joined in the singing of hymns of the Cherokee. All seemed lifted by the preacher's words of faith and hope. 6 men and women professed their desire to join the faith when the meeting was done. The preacher's hope was to be allowed to leave the fort under guard to take their new converts down to the river for baptism next Sunday. The officer of the camp seems more than a little sympathetic. He and some others, white officers and soldiers, appear saddened by what they have been forced to do. They see that we Cherokee are not wild savages, but human beings who dress and live much like their own families. I think these white men have been led to wonder if the same might happen to them someday. Is it possible that someday an army of strangers will march into their homeland, looting and burning and driving them from their lands, as well as the Indians have been driven? June 12th, 1838. Reverend Butler tells me that General Scott gave firm orders for his troops to treat the Cherokees gently. Many of his men tried to follow his orders. Not so the Georgia volunteers. Scott was shocked to hear a group of Georgia soldiers joking about which of them would gather the most Cherokee scalps. What is that you say? Scott asked one of them. Begging your pardon, General, a Georgian replied, but it is well known that them Cherokees ain't truly human. For his own part, Scott began to doubt that the Georgians among his troops were truly Christians. For that reason, Scott ensured that every Georgian he could find under his own direct command so that he might be able to keep an eye on them. June 13, 1838. Tried to assist others here in the camp, but was told to wait until I was well, so I sit here in a small corner and write in my journal. I shall try to describe what life is like in the camp. Also, I must do something else. People have seen me writing and asked me what I am doing. When I tell them I am keeping record of all that is happening, they are often eager for their stories to be told. There are so many that I cannot tell them all, but I will share a few, though I will not mention the true names of any of our Cherokee people, should this journal be read by hostile eyes. Instead, I shall make up the names to protect them. Save for my own name, the names of the white people, and the names of our well-known leaders. This is what I have been doing all along.